Why was everyone watching her in silence? The rhythmic echo of gunfire rolled across the range, each burst snapping through the Afghan air like thunder over dry mountains. Dust hung in the light, golden, sharp, drifting over rows of Navy SEALs resetting their weapons. And then there was her, a lone figure, walking down the line in measured steps, one hand brushing the sling of her rifle, the other adjusting the black strap across her face. The eye patch. Sergeant Maya Reeves had never liked the word disability. It sounded like a verdict, something final, but she'd learned painfully that in the military, a world that lived and died by precision, people didn't see past what was missing. They saw what they thought you'd lost. The patch covered more than an injury. It hid the reminder of that day, the ambush outside Kandahar, where shrapnel had taken her left eye and nearly her life. The same day she'd held her position, half blind, and returned fire until her unit got out alive. That act had earned her medals and 6 months of silence. Recovery, paperwork, evaluations, endless questions about whether she was fit for duty. Today, she would answer them the only way she knew how, with the trigger. She reached the firing bench where a cluster of operators had paused mid-drill. They didn't speak, but she could feel their judgment in the air, the way soldiers could sense danger before seeing it. Maya had grown used to that, the quiet whispers, the second glances. Even among warriors, there was a code of silent assessment, strength respected, weakness dissected. At the far end of the line stood Commander James Harrington, tall, still, a man who carried command like a shadow. His uniform bore no decoration, only the faint marks of years in the field. His eyes followed her without expression, but his reputation had reached her long before this meeting. Former DEVGRU, 6 tour, known for turning potential into precision and excuses into exits. "Sergeant Reeves," he said, his voice even unreadable. "Sir." He studied her for a moment, then lifted the folder in his hand, her personnel file, a thin record of survival and defiance. "Your file makes for interesting reading." "Thank you, sir." "I didn't say it was good reading." His gaze flicked briefly to her eye patch. "The Barrett requires exceptional depth perception. You understand why there are doubts." The wind carried the faint smell of oil and cordite between them. Maya held his stare. "Permission to demonstrate rather than debate, sir." A pause, then the faintest hint of a smile. "Granted." He stepped aside, revealing the long, black frame of the Barrett resting on the table. The .50 caliber rifle, a weapon that could reach beyond 2 kilometers and punch through engine blocks. It was heavy, deliberate, not just a rifle, but a statement. "Target at 2,500 meters, Harrington said. "Variable crosswind 8 to 12 knots. You get 3 rounds." Every SEAL at the range turned to watch. Maya stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel. She ran her hand along the cold steel of the Barrett, the texture familiar, almost comforting. Her pulse slowed, the old rhythm returning. She had spent months retraining herself to see differently, to use shadow, contrast, and motion rather than depth, to trust instinct more than symmetry. Every hour of her rehabilitation had led to this. She loaded the first round. The metallic click sounded louder than it should have. She lay prone, adjusting her body, calculating the distance in her mind. Her remaining eye pressed to the scope, and the world collapsed into a tunnel of focus. The hum of conversation, the scrape of boots, all of it fell away. Through the scope she saw the target shimmer in the heat haze, a steel silhouette half a mile away, painted in faded white. The wind shifted, tugging at her sleeve. She made the correction. Her breathing slowed, 1 heartbeat, 2. Then stillness. The trigger broke clean. The recoil punched through her shoulder, rolling through her bones like thunder. Half a second later, a metallic clang echoed faintly across the range. A hit, dead center. Nobody spoke. She cycled the next round. The wind shifted again, just slightly, but enough that she could feel it tug against the barrel. She adjusted 2 clicks right, 1 down. Another breath, another silence. The shot rang out sharper this time. Another hit. Even from this distance, she saw the target shudder, the sound arriving a full second later. The third round she hesitated, not for doubt but for memory. The last time she'd fired this rifle in combat, everything had gone wrong. The blast, the screams, the smell of blood and sand. Her hand trembled, but she steadied it. This wasn't about then. This was about now. She exhaled slowly, pressed the trigger, and watched the third impact land within inches of the first two. Silence. Harrington said nothing at first. He only stared through his binoculars, his jaw tightening. Then he lowered them, turned, and spoke, not loudly, but with the tone that cut through noise like a blade. Reset the range. The SEALs moved without question, but not before casting looks her way, not mockery this time, but something else. Maybe surprise, maybe respect. Harrington approached. You just silenced a lot of doubters, Sergeant. I wasn't aiming for them, sir. A faint smile ghosted across his face. Good answer. He turned toward the range office. Follow me, there's something you need to see. As they walked, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant hum of rotor blades from the helipad beyond the hills. The sound always made Maya uneasy. Helicopters meant movement, deployment, the start of something. She didn't know then that it would also mark the beginning of a mission that would test everything she thought she'd already overcome. Inside the operations tent, the air was cooler, heavy with the smell of canvas and dust. A digital map glowed on the wall, dotted with red markers along the mountainous border region. Harrington tapped one of them, a jagged valley near the Pakistan line. Operation Phantom Sight, he said. High-risk extraction, deep-cover intelligence officer, captured 3 weeks ago. Location confirmed here, compound under control of Azim Tariq. The name stopped her breath. Tariq, the insurgent commander who'd orchestrated the ambush 6 months ago, the one who'd taken her eye, the one she'd thought dead. Harrington continued, unaware of the storm behind her steady expression. You'll provide overwatch. One shot will initiate the assault. Miss and the captive dies. Hesitate and we all die. There's no room for second chances. She swallowed, her throat dry. Understood, sir. Good, we deploy in 5 days. Get your team familiar with your timing and comms. You'll be working alongside Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dawson. He's direct. Don't take it personally. Wouldn't dream of it. But she knew the name. Dawson, known across multiple units as one of the best field tacticians in the Navy. Hard, disciplined, and unimpressed by reputation. This would not be an easy alliance. That night, alone in her quarters, Maya unfastened her eye patch and looked at her reflection in the small metal mirror on her desk. The scars caught the dim light, a map of everything she'd endured. She traced a finger along the ridged skin where her eye had once been and whispered to herself, "You're not broken, you're rebuilt." Outside, the desert wind whispered through the tents. Somewhere out there, her enemy was alive, waiting, believing himself beyond reach. But he didn't know she was coming. Not yet. She dreamed of the ambush again. The convoy, the sudden flash, the roar of metal tearing apart, blood in her mouth, a scream that never ended, the weight of her rifle pressed against her chest as she fired blind through the smoke. Then silence, always ending in silence. When she woke, dawn was cutting through the tent seams. Another day closer to deployment. Another day to prove that one eye could still see what others couldn't. And far away on the other side of those mountains, Azim Tariq studied a satellite photo in a dim bunker, tracing the lines of supply routes and listening to the faint hum of his radio. "They'll come," he murmured to his lieutenant. "They always do." He smiled, unaware that the one he'd left half-blind had never stopped aiming for him. What happens when the man you have to trust is the one who doesn't believe in you? The question lingered in Maya's mind as she stepped onto the training field 3 days later, the sharp desert sun cutting through the air like glass. Rows of targets stretched downrange, their outlines dancing in the shimmer of heat. Around her, The new task force assembled, a blend of SEALs, Rangers, and a handful of CIA field liaisons. Each man carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen too much and survived. Maya knew what they saw when they looked at her, the woman with one eye, a walking question mark in a world that didn't like uncertainty. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dawson leaned against a crate near the edge of the range, his arms crossed, expression cool and analytical. A decade of combat had carved lines into his face, but his eyes were sharp and deliberate. He watched her like a man assessing a piece of unfamiliar equipment, functional perhaps, but untested. "Sergeant Reeves," he said without looking up from the scope he was cleaning. "Commander Harrington says you're our overwatch. That right?" "Yes, Chief." He nodded once, unimpressed. "You hit steel at 2500. Congratulations. But out there, steel doesn't shoot back." She bit back her first response. Anger wouldn't help. Not here. "Then I guess I'll make sure it never gets the chance to." Dawson's gaze lifted, a flicker of something challenge, maybe respect, crossing his face. "We'll see." The day's drills began under the unrelenting sun. Team formations, timed movements, coordination between Overwatch and ground units. Every exercise built toward one thing: synchronization. Maya worked to align her timing with the team's assault patterns, her voice calm over the radio as she called shots and cover arcs. But every missed beat, every half-second delay, drew Dawson's criticism like iron to a magnet. "Too slow, Reeves. Overcompensated on that angle. Your depth's off by 2 meters. That's a miss in the field." Each remark landed like a small blow, but she absorbed them, cataloged them, adjusted. She lived through worse than words. By evening, the desert cooled and the range lights flickered to life. Harrington appeared at the edge of the training ground, arms folded, silent observer. Maya wiped sweat from her brow, reloading the Barrett for another round. "One last run," Dawson said, kneeling beside her. His tone softened slightly, less challenge, more curiosity. "Tell me something, Sergeant. Why push this hard? You've already done more than most could after what happened to you." Maya looked through the scope, her voice steady. "Because if I stop pushing, that's when it wins." "What does?" "The part that wants to believe I'm not enough anymore." She fired. The round struck dead center. Dawson said nothing for a long moment, then stood. "Maybe you're tougher than I thought. Maybe I just have more to prove." The words lingered between them as the echo of the shot faded into the desert night. That night Maya returned to her quarters, her muscles aching, her hands raw from the Barrett's recoil. She set the rifle aside, the tent illuminated by the dim yellow glow of a single lamp. On the small table beside her bunk lay a photograph, 3 soldiers, smiling, their uniforms streaked with dust. 2 of them were gone now. She ran her fingers over their faces. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months and I still see it every night." The image of the ambush came back in flashes. The explosion that tore through the lead vehicle, the screams over the radio, the blood pooling in the sand. Her friends had died before she could reach them, her vision half blurred with pain. That was the day she swore she'd never freeze again. Her comms device crackled, breaking the silence. "Reeves," came Harrington's voice. "Command wants us at the briefing tent. Now." She grabbed her patch, fastened it over the scar, and stepped back into the night. The operations tent was crowded with the sharp scent of coffee, sweat, and tension. A satellite feed flickered on the large screen, an overhead view of jagged mountain ridges and shadowed valleys. Harrington stood beside the projector, pointer in hand. Dawson, 2 CIA officers, and 3 other operators formed a half-circle around him. "Intel just confirmed movement at the target site," Harrington said. "Our man's still alive. They're prepping to move him east in 72 hours. That gives us one shot." He looked at Maya. "Your position will be here, Ridge Line Delta 4. It's elevated, but it puts you at 2,100 meters from the compound. You'll have 8 minutes of visibility before sunrise. Wind shifts every 90 seconds, unpredictable terrain. Once the signal's given, your first shot triggers the assault. She studied the map carefully, tracing the elevation lines. The shot was possible barely, but what concerned her wasn't the distance. It was the terrain itself. Mountain winds were treacherous, and even a half-second misjudgment could send the bullet wide. Harrington continued. The extraction team moves in immediately after her shot. No second chances. The window closes fast. Dawson raised a hand. Sir, with respect, that valley's a wind tunnel. We're counting on a single shooter one-eyed to hit a moving mark at over 2 clicks. That's not a plan, that's a prayer. Maya's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. Harrington's expression didn't change. Noted, Chief, but Sergeant Reeves has already proven she can make shots that others won't even attempt. With all due respect, sir, Dawson pressed, range shooting and live fire under pressure are 2 different worlds. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Then maybe it's time to stop comparing worlds, Chief. The tent went quiet. Harrington's gaze flicked between them. That'll be enough. You both have 48 hours to make sure that world doesn't collapse under fire. Dismissed. They trained harder after that. The next 2 days blurred into a cycle of exhaustion and precision. Maya adjusted her timing, recalibrated her optics, and studied the wind patterns projected from drone footage. Dawson, despite his skepticism, began to offer quiet corrections. He never said it aloud, but his tone softened, his words slower, more deliberate. "You're overcompensating left," he murmured one night as she sighted a mock target in the simulation range. "I'm adjusting for thermal distortion." "Not that high. Drop a half-mil dot, trust the correction." She followed his advice. The simulated shot hit dead center. He exhaled slowly, the faintest trace of approval in his eyes. "You learn fast." "I have to." That was the closest thing to praise she'd ever get from him. The night before deployment, Harrington found her alone, sitting outside her tent, cleaning her rifle under the stars. "You've done well," he said quietly. She looked up. "I'm ready." "I know." He hesitated, then added, "Just remember, revenge makes a poor compass." Her hands froze for a moment. "I'm not after revenge." "Then what are you after?" She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "Peace." Harrington studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some rest. You'll need it." As he walked away, Maya looked down at the rifle resting across her knees, the same weapon she'd once thought she'd never touch again. She brushed her fingers along the steel barrel, whispering almost to herself. "Tomorrow I take it back." At dawn, the team loaded onto the helicopter. The rotors screamed to life, slicing through the morning air. The world outside turned to blur, desert, then stone, then the rising spines of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Maya sat beside Dawson, the Barrett secured between her knees. Neither spoke. The vibration of the helicopter rattled through the cabin, a steady heartbeat against the tension in her chest. She stared out the open side door as they climbed higher, the horizon turning gold, the valleys far below filling with fog. Dawson leaned forward, voice raised over the roar of the engines. "You ever think about what happens if we don't make it back?" She met his gaze. "No, I think about what happens if we don't go at all." He studied her for a moment, then looked away, a faint smile breaking the edge of his expression. "Fair enough." The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Approaching drop zone, 2 minutes." Harrington gave a silent nod to the team, then turned to Maya. "You know your job, make it count." She nodded once, tightening her grip on the Barrett. The helicopter dipped low, skimming the ridge line. Dust exploded outward as they descended toward a narrow plateau, the overwatch position she'd studied for days. Her boots hit the ground first. Cold wind cut through her uniform, carrying the scent of stone and distance. She dropped to one knee, scanning the terrain, the valley below, the faint lights of the compound still glowing in the early dawn. For a moment everything was silent, peaceful. Then she heard it, the low crack of distant gunfire. "Contact already," Dawson muttered, scanning the ridges. Harrington's voice came sharp over comms. "No, that's not us." Maya turned her scope toward the valley and saw movement, figures running, muzzle flashes in the dark. Her pulse quickened. "It's the backup team," she said. "They're under fire." Harrington swore under his breath. That wasn't supposed to happen. Change of plan. Reeves, get eyes on the compound. We move early. Maya steadied her scope, heart pounding. In the distance she saw the target, their captive, being dragged into the courtyard, his face bloodied, alive. "This is it," she whispered. "Take your position," Harrington ordered. "And remember, once you fire, everything starts." She settled behind the Barrett, adjusting her scope. The wind shifted, time slowed. For a fleeting second, she closed her remaining eye and listened to the wind, to her heartbeat, to the ghosts that whispered from the past. Then she opened it, focused. Target in sight. Why did the world narrow to a single breath? The valley below was a pool of shadow and movement, the compound a scatter of light swallowed by stone. Maya's world had gone small, a tunnel through glass, the crosshairs framing a tiny, impossible square of humanity 2 clicks away. Everything else filtered out. The rotor wash a distant drum, the murmured comms like ghost voices, the prick of cold air on her hands. Only the scope mattered. Only the moment. She braced into the Barrett as if leaning into a truth. The rifle's mass settled across her shoulder the way a familiar ache settles into bone. Inevitable, honest. Her cheek pressed to the stock. Her only eye read the world through magnified glass. The patch on her face felt heavier now, less a shield and more a promise. She had trained for this until her muscles remembered the math of breathing and recoil before her mind did. Now those muscles hummed with the memory. The compound's courtyard was waking. Figures moved with purpose. Men with rifles. A man dragged, head bowed, blood on his collar. That was the captive. That was the life they had come to steal back. Harrington's voice crackled in her ear, clipped, steady. "Rules: 1 shot, initiate assault. Miss and we abort. Delay and we lose the window. You understand?" "I understand," she breathed. The wind was a liar that morning. It played games between the ridgelines, puffing soft then hard, switching direction in the span of a heartbeat. Maya watched the telemetry on her tablet, little numbers that might as well have been incantations. Wind at bearing 38, gusting to 43. Temperature gradient. Barometric shift. Each datum a small argument for why this shot should not be taken. Each datum a challenge she had chosen to accept. Her hands were steady. Her mouth tasted of metal. She felt the old, familiar drift of doubt, the one that arrives unannounced and sits like a second shadow. It whispered of failures and voices and the 2 faces in a photograph that no longer smiled. It tried to be convincing. She had learned to treat it like a storm, acknowledge its presence, then ignore its thunder. "Target moving," Dawson murmured beside her, low enough only she could hear. "Crossing to the vehicle, looks unstable." She tracked him. A man stumbled, 2 others yanked him toward a battered truck. The captive's head slumped for a moment, then rose, defiant still. Maya's throat closed. She wasn't firing for vengeance. She had repeated the word to Harrington and to herself until it tasted like a different currency. But the truth, raw and stubborn, remained. She carried an inventory of losses. If she could stop even one family from opening a box of folded cloth, that arithmetic made sense in her bones. "Hold for signal," Harrington ordered. "We get 1 window." Her finger hovered. The barrel warmed against her skin. The crosswind made the crosshairs shimmy. She breathed and counted like a metronome invented to steady drowning hearts. In 2, 3. Out 2, 3. She indexed all the corrections she'd practiced 1,000 times, mil dots for elevation, half clicks for wind, lead for motion. She thought of the ambush, not as a scar but as a lesson. She thought of the hands that had steadied her while medics worked, the hands that had been gone when the smoke cleared. She thought of Dawson's voice the night before, the man who had become less judge and more measure with every hour they spent together. "Ready," she said. "Not a claim, a statement of fact." "Signal in 10 seconds," Harrington said. "Plan moves at first light, be ready." They scheduled a rhythm, silent countdowns, breath by breath. The assault team crouched in their hiding places, rifles held like quiet promises. Maya saw the assault leader's jaw tighten through the scope, saw the way his shoulders flexed. He trusted her. That trust sat in her chest like a live coal. The signal came as a flash, a tracer arching in the distance. Not aimed at them, a distraction. Harrington's whisper, "Now." She exhaled, she squeezed. The shot detonated the way thunder arrives. An immediate, all-encompassing authority. The rifle's recoil dug into her shoulder and rolled through her like a wave, and for a beat she thought she might be back in that other firestorm. Only this time she felt the world answering in measured, ordered claps, telemetry confirmations, a single radio. Impact. What she had aimed for was not a man's chest. She had aimed for a generator, a crucial node powering lights, radio, and the electric lock that kept their man's fate uncertain. She had chosen to break the machine first and create the chaos the assault would need. The generator shuddered and died. The compound collapsed into black. The silence that followed the shot was heavy and immediate. For a moment nothing seemed to be happening. Then the night erupted. Explosions, shouts, and the staccato bark of close-quarters firefights. Maya switched targets, each choice a small, merciless calculus. She watched men appear in moonlit windows, heard the thin, brittle crack of small arms. She moved her aim like a chess master answering with pieces, denying angles, buying time. Radio reports came in clipped bursts. Team 2 moving, covering fire on the east wall. Extraction team inbound. Harrington's voice kept the tempo. Move, move, move. The valley turned into a breathing thing of violence. Shadows lunged and collapsed. Maya found herself nomming targets the way a surgeon names tools. 1, 2, 3. Each shot was deliberate, not to slake some private thirst but to perform a function. To clear a lane, to keep people breathing long enough to run. That was the language of duty she had always understood. Then the unexpected. Chatter in a language her earpiece didn't translate, followed by the dull, terrible realization that they were not alone in the kill zone. A second force. An ambush on the ambush. The air filled with new muzzle reports, closer now, and the assault team's comms spiked with a flurry of warnings she hadn't been prepared for. "Backup took fire," Dawson said flatly. "3 down. Rodriguez is in the field." The name landed like a fist. Rodriguez, the man who had carried her across the compound in Germany while they both recovered from different ghosts. The line between old and new pain blurred. Harrington's voice clipped. "Hold position, we adjust exfil." Maya's hands never stopped. Her eyes, the one that remained, tracked motion, not depth. She used shape and rhythm, a practiced lie of sight. She took a shot that clipped the shoulder of an advancing fighter, then a second that stopped a man from hunkering behind a vehicle. Each round was a small mercy or a small cruelty depending on which side of the barrel you stood. Time dissolved into a series of mechanical acts. Breathe, measure, correct, fire. The physics of survival made moral philosophy irrelevant for the hours it took to run a mission. Still, between the gunshots and the radio static, the old questions poked like splinters. Who gets to decide which life we end to save another? How much of the self do you trade to keep the rest intact? She found herself thinking not of her eye, but of those faces in the photo back at the tent. The faces of people who had trusted her. She wondered if they would have wanted this for her, this responsibility, this weight. She also wondered if responsibility ever felt like a favor from the world, or if it was simply a weight you bore because no one else would. Minutes stretched. Exhaustion crept at the edges of her thinking, but adrenaline kept the hands nimble. Harrington's voice through the static. "Extraction team is moving toward the ridge. You need to create a diversion that buys them a clean line." The choice was at once tactical and personal. The western wall had an ammo cache. She could take it and turn the courtyard into a furnace, or she could aim for vehicles and create mobility. Either choice meant more bodies in motion, more risks. She picked the cash. The explosion would be a beacon. It would be loud, and in war, noise often equals time. She found the cache. She aimed. She thought very briefly of all the small things that had led her here. The rehab exercises measuring depth with a string and a stone, the nights learning to trust auditory cues, the man who had once told her vengeance made a poor compass. She thought of the captive's brother, unnamed, who might have a life to return to. She fired. The explosion was immediate and complete. The courtyard lit like daylight for a second, and then it became a maze of tumbling bodies and fleeing shadows. The assault team surged. Voices on the radio turned to shouts of surprise and triumph. "We've got eyes on the prisoner. We've got him." The moment the prisoner's silhouette moved toward the extraction point, everything snapped into motion. The team called for withdrawal. Harrington ordered the exfil route. Maya watched the narrow line of men sprint for the ridge, the way humans look small and enormous at the same time when they run for a chance to live. They moved. She covered. She fired until her ammo count dwindled like the last grains in an hourglass. Each shot was a payment for another step, another breath. At some point, the assault team reached the tree line and dipped into cover. The extraction helicopter hovered, rotors carving the air into a blind that swallowed shouts. The captive, bloody, defiant, alive, was loaded. The team moved to the rally point. "Extraction complete," came from someone on the radio. Relief cracked Harrington's voice like a safe opening. "Return to position and prepare to withdraw." Maya lowered the Barrett for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Her arms trembled. The relief coursed through her body like cold water. It was good because it meant someone had lived. It was bad because the world still held its tally of loss. They staggered to the rally. A helicopter took them out under a sky that had gone from pre-dawn to a bruised blue. The climb felt like an ascent from a stomach of smoke. Inside the bird, faces were wet with sweat and dust. Hands shook not only from exertion but from the afterimage of what had passed. Rodriguez, alive, bandaged, breathing, turned his head toward Maya for a breathless moment. His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, relief, an old familiarity that no metal could ever manufacture. "You did good," Harrington said, voice quiet. Not praise like an award. Praise like a human acknowledging another human had held the line. Maya did not speak. She let the helicopter's drone fill the silence and counted the small things, each operator breathing, each name accounted for. They had lost men in the field. That tally would hurt later. For now, the mission had succeeded. The captive was alive. Azam Tarek's network had been bruised. The world would shift incrementally. But success did not erase the interior ledger she carried. Sitting with the rifle across her lap, she felt the old wound and a new one, not physical but moral, like an ache behind the ribs. She had fired. She had chosen who would live and who might die. That weight would not leave with the flight. It would hitch a ride, quiet and persistent, into the days to come. Sometimes, she thought, watching the mountains slip away, the hardest part is not making the shot. It's living with the answer. The words had no audience but herself. They were not declarations. They were notes in a ledger she would consult in the long nights that followed. The mission had a citation waiting at the end of it, and probably medals. But medals didn't reach into the small hours when the mind replayed decisions like film. Below them, the compound smoldered. Above them, the sky held nothing but a pale, steady light. Between those two was her life, threaded with consequences and small mercies. She closed her patch over her eye and let the rotor's thrum become a lullaby. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different ending, one without the flash of a rifle, one where the past was a closed door. But she knew the past did not offer such favors. It kept its account open. And somewhere in the mountains, a man who had once thought himself untouchable was now waking to a new reality. He was no longer invisible. Maya stared out at the line where rock met sky and kept her mouth closed. She had acted. Dignity, she thought, did not always make sound. Sometimes it was measured in details. A hand steady on a rifle, a breath taken with intention, a choice made in a world that insists on none. What did survival look like when the shooting stopped? For Maya, it looked like a tent lit by a single bulb, its fabric walls breathing with the night wind and the smell of oil and blood. The hum of generators outside was steady, but faint, a reminder that they were still close enough to the mountains for danger to find them if it wanted to. She sat on her cot with her back straight and her hands flat on her knees, the posture of someone forcing calm into muscle. The Barrett leaned against the wall, cleaned twice already. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to idle. The mission had ended less than 12 hours ago. The prisoner was safe, sedated on a plane to Germany. Harrington's report had been filed, terse and factual, objective secured, hostile force neutralized, minimal friendly casualties. That last line hung in her mind like a sentence with missing words. Minimal. It did not name the men who had not made it to the ridge. Outside, boots scraped against gravel. Someone laughed too loud, the sound of relief turned brittle by fatigue. Then the laughter fell quiet again, replaced by a different silence, the kind that fills spaces where ghosts are expected. She touched the patch over her eye, then removed it, setting it on the table beside her. The scar beneath it had faded to a smooth pink line, but it would always pull slightly when she squinted. The doctors had called it functional. She called it unfinished. When Harrington stepped into the tent, he didn't knock. Commanders didn't need permission in a place where rank was the only constant. He looked more tired than she'd ever seen him. His uniform dusted with the color of mountains, his eyes rimmed in red. "You should be resting," he said. "I will," she answered, though neither believed it. He studied her rifle, then the empty cot across from hers. Dawson. Outside, talking to air support. They're still patching telemetry data. He nodded, crossed his arms, and stood for a long moment, saying nothing. Then quietly, 3 of ours didn't make it back. You know that. She did. She had heard the names on the extraction manifest, the pauses in the list where living voices should have answered. She had marked them, the way soldiers always did, a ledger no one else would ever see. Harrington exhaled slowly. "You did your job, we all did, but that doesn't make it lighter." Maya looked up. "It's supposed to hurt, sir." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Maybe that's the only proof we're still human." He hesitated, then added, "You saved the team, Sergeant, that's the fact. The rest," he trailed off. "The rest was the part command reports didn't include." When he left, she sat for a long time staring at the patch on the table. The night outside had gone utterly still. No laughter now. No motion. Just the endless, empty quiet that came after missions when adrenaline drained and the mind started replaying what the body had done. She felt the familiar slide between clarity and guilt. She told herself it would fade. It never did, not completely. 2 weeks later, they were back at the forward operating base. The team scattered, some rotated home, some reassigned. The makeshift camaraderie of the operation dissolved into paperwork and reassessment. Maya found herself once again on the range, the same dust, the same sun, but something inside her had shifted. She fired at steel silhouettes until her shoulder bruised. She wasn't practicing aim. She was practicing quiet. Dawson showed up halfway through her second magazine. He didn't say anything at first, just watched from the side. When she reloaded, he stepped closer. "You ever stop? Do you?" He smirked. "Fair." He picked up a spent casing, turned it between his fingers, then said, "Harrington put you in for a medal." Maya lowered the rifle. "They can pin metal on my uniform, Chief, but it won't balance the books." "That's not what it's for." "Then what is it for?" He didn't answer. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Rodriguez asked about you. He said you saved his life twice, once in Germany, once up there." She looked back toward the targets shimmering in the heat. "He saved mine first." They stood in silence, the sun pressing down. Then Dawson spoke again, voice lower now. "You think it's over, that Tarek operation?" No, she said. Things like that never end clean. They end when someone decides to stop chasing ghosts. He studied her profile, the way the light hit the edge of her patch. And have you? She loaded another round, chambered it with a precise, practiced motion. Not yet. The shot cracked through the range. The target flipped backward with a clang. That night she received a sealed folder marked confidential on her bunk. No sender name, only a line of typed text across the bottom, for eyes of the operator only. Inside were reconnaissance photos, new, sharp, recent. The mountains again. The same valley, but this time the figures circled in red were not militants. They were children, refugees. The annotation read, civilians returning to area, possible insurgent activity resurgent. Beneath that, a note in Harrington's handwriting, we might not be finished. Briefing tomorrow. She set the file aside and stared at the ceiling. Finished. The word had never belonged to soldiers. Sleep came slow, broken by dreams that weren't quite nightmares, more like replays with missing frames. The same valley. The same silence after the shot. Only this time, when she looked through the scope, there was no target, just empty mountains and wind. The briefing the next morning was smaller, quieter. No maps this time, just a discussion between Harrington, a CIA liaison, and her. The liaison's suit looked out of place amid the dust. He talked in the measured tones of someone who used language as armor. Intelligence suggests Tarek's network fractured, but elements remain. Our concern isn't revenge. It's containment. If they regroup, we're back to square one. Maya folded her arms. Containment doesn't erase memory. The man blinked, unsure how to answer that. Harrington cut in. We're not sending you back there, Reeves. You've done enough. She met his eyes. That's not your call, sir. Not if there are still people in that valley. He sighed. Sometimes doing enough means letting someone else take the next shot. She looked down at her hands. The scars on her knuckles were pale against her skin. And sometimes it means knowing exactly where to aim. There was no decision made that morning, only the shape of one forming. The liaison left. Harrington stayed. He looked at her a long time, then said quietly, if you go back, you're not going for him. You're going for them. Remember that. I know, she said. He nodded once, a small gesture of faith. In the days that followed, she stayed on the range. The Barrett sat untouched. Instead, she worked with lighter rifles, training recruits who rotated through the base. They came in loud and eager, all questions and jokes until they saw the patch. Then they grew quiet. One afternoon, a young private asked, "Ma'am, how do you even shoot straight with, you know?" He caught himself embarrassed. She smiled faintly. You stop seeing with your eyes, you start seeing with everything else. He nodded, not understanding yet but trying. Later, as the sun went down, Harrington joined her again. Teaching suits you, he said. It's temporary. He tilted his head. Everything is. They watched the last trainees clear their brass from the ground. The range lights flickered on, humming faintly. Harrington's voice softened. You ever think about what comes after, when the missions stop? Does that happen? Eventually. She thought about that, then shook her head. I think when the missions stop, people like us just change the definition. He smiled, tired, almost proud. Then maybe that's what makes you dangerous. That night she walked to the perimeter fence. Beyond it, the desert stretched forever, painted in starlight. The mountains were faint shadows on the horizon, distant but never truly gone. She thought of her friends buried under those same stars. She thought of the lives she'd taken and the ones she'd saved. She thought of the young private and his question, and the answer she hadn't given, that every shot leaves a mark, not just on the target but on the shooter. The wind shifted, carrying sand against her boots. She closed her eye and listened to the sound of it. Somewhere in that whisper, she imagined she could still hear the echo of the Barrett, not the violence, but the precision, the discipline, the moment of stillness before everything changes. She opened her eye again. The stars above seemed closer now, brighter. She adjusted the patch and walked back toward the tents. Behind her, the mountains waited patient, dark, silent. Ahead, the base lights burned steady. Between them, Sergeant Maya Reeves kept moving, not toward war, not away from it, just forward into whatever came next. What do you do when the war ends? But the silence does. For Maya Reeves, it started with the quiet, a kind of silence that wasn't peace, but absence. The kind that hummed in the skull when everyone else was laughing in the mess hall, the kind that filled her tent after the lights went out. It wasn't the silence of safety. It was the silence that came when purpose paused and memory filled the gap. 3 weeks had passed since the operation. The medal ceremony had been brief, efficient, and mercifully private. Harrington pinned the Navy Cross to her uniform while the wind tugged at the edges of the flag behind them. No speeches, just the sound of camera shutters, the weight of metal, and the murmured applause of men who understood that recognition and redemption were not the same thing. Now back stateside at the training compound in Quantico, Maya felt more out of place than she ever had overseas. The base smelled of cut grass instead of sand, jet fuel instead of dust. Trainees ran drills across manicured ranges. Their laughter carried on air that didn't taste like gunpowder. Everything here looked clean, rehearsed, manageable. She wasn't sure she knew how to live in manageable anymore. The official orders said temporary assignment marksmanship instruction. The subtext was clear: keep her on ground, keep her visible, and give the media time to move on. Harrington had given her the out she hadn't asked for: a desk in the field, not the field itself. And though part of her was grateful, another part felt like she'd been left in neutral while the rest of the world shifted gears. The first day on the range was worse than she expected. Trainees called her ma'am too often, saluted too sharply. When she walked by, they stopped talking as if silence was respect. She preferred the old silence, the one that had weight and danger, to this hollow kind. "Eyes up," she told a young corporal fumbling with his M110. "You're treating that rifle like it owes you something. It doesn't. Respect the weapon and it'll respect you." "Yes, ma'am." She crouched beside him, adjusted his grip, her voice even. "Squeeze, don't pull." He fired. The round struck the outer edge of the target. "Better," she said, though her tone carried the softness of memory rather than approval. By the end of the day, she'd said "better" 100 times. It felt like an echo of something she was still trying to believe herself. When the sun went down, the field lights snapped off one by one. Maya stayed long after the others left. The air cooled, the smell of oil and brass lingering. She set up her own target, 1,200 meters, the longest the range allowed. She didn't have to prove anything anymore, but habit had its own kind of gravity. She lay prone, adjusted the Barrett's bipod, and breathed. The sight picture settled into focus, familiar and perfect. But when she pulled the trigger, the sound wasn't the same. The shot rang hollow, echoing off the trees without resistance. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from memory. Every shot she'd taken had weight, and weight didn't vanish with distance. She set the rifle down, sat back, and stared into the darkness. Somewhere in that stillness, she heard it again, the voice she tried to bury under mission reports and discipline. "You take the shot, Sergeant." Not accusation, not comfort, just a voice, the way ghosts sound when they've forgotten their names. She rubbed a hand over her face. "Yeah," she whispered, "every day." Harrington showed up unannounced 2 days later. He looked different out of combat gear, wearing pressed fatigues, a folder tucked under one arm. The years seemed to sit heavier on him now. They met in the training office, its walls lined with commendations and photos of operators who'd come through the program. "You settling in?" he asked. Maya shrugged. "I'm teaching them to shoot straight, that's something." "It's more than something. You're shaping operators who'll come home because of what you teach." She leaned back in her chair. "I'd rather be out there making sure they do." He smiled faintly. "You always did prefer the edge of the map." The silence between them held a kind of mutual understanding, the kind only two people who'd bled on the same soil could share. Finally, Harrington slid the folder across the table. "There's something I want you to see." Inside were photographs, satellite stills, grainy but clear enough, a new insurgent camp rising from the ashes of the last one, same mountains, same terrain, different banners. Tarek's face wasn't among them because there was no face. He was gone, captured after her mission, later confirmed dead in a prison convoy ambush. But his network had roots that went deep. Someone was trying to resurrect the old operations. Harrington said quietly, "They're asking for consultants, long-range support for the next rotation. I told them you weren't ready." Maya looked up, her expression unreadable. "You think I'm not?" "I think the part of you that needs to prove something isn't done yet. That's not readiness. That's residue." The words cut closer to truth than she wanted to admit. He continued, "You've done enough for the mission, for the country. Maybe now it's time you did something for yourself." She closed the folder. "And what would that be, sir?" "Gardening." He smiled faintly. "Healing." She exhaled through her nose, not quite a laugh. "You ever met a soldier who knew how to do that?" "No," he said, "but maybe one has to start." He left the folder on her desk. When he was gone, she stared at the images, mountains, tents, small fires glowing like stars. Every part of her wanted to go back. Every part of her knew she shouldn't. That night she took a walk beyond the compound's edge. The woods were quiet, the moon silvering the treetops. She found a fallen log and sat, hands clasped, watching the fog move low across the grass. For years her purpose had been sharp and simple: protect, execute, survive. Now, stripped of that clarity, she felt something she hadn't expected: weightless. And weightless, she realized, wasn't freedom. It was drift. She thought of Dawson, now reassigned to another unit. He'd left her a short note before he flew out: "You shoot like someone who believes in redemption. Don't stop believing in it, even when it stops believing in you." She had folded the note once and kept it in her pocket, a charm she hadn't earned. Her breath fogged in the night air. "Redemption," she said softly. "Maybe that's just another kind of mission." Weeks passed. The trainees rotated, new faces replacing old ones. Her routine became predictable: the same drills, the same commands, the same corrections. But somewhere in the monotony, something changed. She began to see fragments of herself in the rookies: the impatience, the hunger, the fear they tried to hide behind bravado. She taught them not just how to shoot, but how to breathe, how to pause, how to know the difference between a kill and a save. When one trainee missed a critical shot and cursed it under his breath, she said quietly, "You don't learn from the ones you hit. You learn from the ones you don't." He looked at her confused. "Ma'am." She smiled. "You'll understand someday." It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. Late one evening, Harrington visited again, this time without a folder. He stood on the range, watching her correct a trainee's stance. When the student left, he approached slowly. "You've built something here," he said. "I'm just trying to make sure they're better than I was." He nodded. "You ever think about teaching full-time?" She raised an eyebrow. "Is that an order?" "A suggestion." She considered it for a long moment, then looked toward the horizon. "If I stay here, I teach them to fight. If I leave, maybe I learn to live. Either way, I'm still aiming at something." He smiled. "Then maybe that's enough." That night, alone again, Maya walked down to the river that cut through the edge of the base. The water reflected the stars, quiet and endless. She removed her eye patch, held it in her hands for a moment, and looked at it under the moonlight. Once it had been a symbol of what she'd lost. Now it felt like a reminder of what she'd earned: the right to keep seeing, even differently. She set it back over her scar, then looked out across the river. Somewhere beyond that darkness were mountains and memories, missions and ghosts. But here, in the quiet, in the still, she felt something close to peace. Not complete, Not forever, just enough. Sometimes that's all a soldier gets. She turned back toward the lights of the base, the hum of life behind her. And as she walked, the thought came softly, almost like a prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why does it feel harder to heal than to fight? Maya had asked herself that question every morning since she'd come home. Her body had adjusted, she slept through the night now, ate on schedule, even smiled sometimes when the new recruits cracked jokes. But inside, there was still that small vibration, the low hum of a machine that didn't know it had been switched off. She traded the mountains for trees, the battlefield for a classroom. And yet every time she closed her eye, she saw through the scope again. Not because she wanted to, but because it had become the only way she knew how to look at the world: narrow, focused, controlled. It had been 6 months since the operation. 6 months since she'd pulled that impossible shot in the mountains. 6 months since she'd buried her ghosts under discipline and duty. And tonight those ghosts came calling. The ceremony hall smelled like polished brass and memory, rows of uniforms perfectly aligned. The banners hung stiff, their edges catching the light. Maya stood in formation with other veterans as Commander, no, Captain James Harrington read the roll of honors. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the same weary weight she'd seen in the desert, the kind that comes from men who have outlived too many stories. They called her name near the end. Sergeant Maya Reeves, for extraordinary heroism and unwavering service under fire. Applause, cameras, the weight of another medal pressed against her chest. She nodded politely, shook hands, smiled for the photo. But as she stepped back, she caught her reflection in a glass panel near the podium, uniform sharp, ribbons gleaming, one eye staring back. For a heartbeat, she didn't recognize the woman looking at her. Later, outside under the rain, she stood beside Harrington. The storm was thin but steady, the kind that smelled like concrete in summer. "You did good in there," he said. She smiled faintly. "You mean I didn't scare the politicians?" He chuckled, "That too." They stood there, neither moving. The rain beaded on his cap, rolled off the brim onto his shoulders. Finally, he said quietly, "You're leaving, aren't you?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the parking lot beyond the fence, the headlights streaking through the wet. "I've been offered a position at Annapolis, teaching marksmanship, civilian instructor." Harrington nodded, almost to himself. "You should take it." "You sound relieved." "I sound like a man who's seen too many good ones stay in too long." Maya exhaled. "You ever think about it, leaving?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Every day, but the uniform always finds its way back." She left Quantico 2 weeks later. The base looked smaller in the rearview mirror, the guard towers fading behind a blur of rain. The road stretched out ahead, long and straight, the kind that gave you too much time to think. By the time she reached the Naval Academy, the sun had broken through. She checked into her new quarters, clean, simple, quiet, and walked the campus. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel. Cadets ran drills across the field, their voices bright, unbroken. She envied them, the way youth carried confidence like armor. Her first class was the next morning, long-range engagement and decision-making. Not just ballistics, not just theory. She written her own syllabus. How to breathe under pressure, how to make a choice when the world demands perfection, how to live with what comes after. The lecture hall was full. Dozens of faces stared up at her, curious, nervous, untested. She stood at the front, silent for a long moment. Then she asked, softly but clearly, "Who here has fired a weapon at a living target?" No one raised a hand. "Good," she said. "Keep it that way as long as you can." The room stayed quiet. They weren't expecting that. She smiled slightly, walking along the rows. "The first thing you'll learn in this course isn't how to shoot. It's how to wait." A pause. How to breathe, how to think. A rifle doesn't care about your heartbeat, but it will punish your hesitation. And the day you forget that the person on the other end is human, you stop being a soldier and start being something else. Her words landed with the weight of experience. She saw the cadets exchange glances, some curious, some unsettled. By the end of this course, she continued, you'll understand that the hardest shot you'll ever take isn't the one you fire. It's the one you decide not to. And with that, she began. Over the next few months, Maya found rhythm in the work. She taught cadets how to calculate windage, to read mirage, to control breath under stress. But in the quiet moments between lectures, during breaks, they sought her out for something else. "Ma'am, how do you know when you're ready?" one asked. "You're never ready," she said. "You just stop being afraid of the question." Another cadet stayed behind after class. "Did you ever miss?" She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eye. "Only once, and it wasn't a target." They didn't understand then, but someday they would. Teaching changed her in ways combat never had. It slowed her down, made her see the world without glass and crosshairs. She began to jog along the bay at sunrise, breathe without counting, look at faces without searching for threat. But even peace had its own kind of ambush. One evening, as she graded papers in her quarters, there was a knock on the door. A young officer stood there, drenched from the rain, his uniform crisp, his expression uneasy. "Ma'am," he said, "I was told to deliver this personally." He handed her a sealed envelope stamped with the Department of Defense insignia. She thanked him, closed the door, and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, a photograph, grainy, a familiar mountain ridge, a satellite date from 3 days ago. At the bottom, typed in plain black text, "Residual network activity detected. Coordinates match former phantom site." She sat down, the paper trembling in her hand. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something older, deeper, a pull she'd thought she'd buried. Attached was a note, handwritten, 2 words. "Your call." She recognized the handwriting immediately. Harrington. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she walked the grounds until dawn, along the seawall, past the training fields, under the dim streetlights that flickered like heartbeat monitors. She thought about the cadets, young, hopeful, untouched by what she'd seen. She thought about the mission, the valley, the faces that never came home. If she went back, it wouldn't be for revenge. It wouldn't even be for duty. It would be because unfinished things gnawed at her until they were faced. But she also thought about something else, the sound of her own voice in that classroom telling them to wait, to breathe, to choose restraint over impulse. Maybe this was her test, not to act but to stop. Morning found her standing on the range again, the Barrett laid out before her. She hadn't touched it in weeks. The air was still, the sea mist curling over the field. She sighted through the scope, not at a target, just at the horizon. The crosshairs framed nothing but light. "Your call," she whispered. Then she lowered the rifle, safe, unloaded, and walked away. 2 days later, she mailed a letter. No return address, just one line on the inside. "The ghosts don't need another bullet. They need a witness." It was addressed to Captain James Harrington. That night she returned to the classroom. The cadets were waiting, expectant. She stood before them, calm, centered. "Today," she said, "we're not going to talk about windage or trajectory. We're going to talk about forgiveness." The room went still. "Not for them," she said quietly. "For you, because every soldier carries something home, and if you don't learn to set it down, it'll bury you where you stand." She let the silence linger. Some of them looked away, others nodded slowly. Then she smiled. "Now let's shoot." Later, as the sun set over the bay, Maya sat on the pier watching the light fade. The world was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the absence of sound, the presence of peace. Somewhere behind her, cadets laughed, voices bright in the twilight. She listened to them and smiled, not because they reminded her of what she'd lost, but because they reminded her of why she'd fought it all. She touched the patch over her eye, tracing its edge gently, like closing a door. The war was behind her. The mission was done. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't need a target. She just needed tomorrow. Why does peace always arrive with conditions? Maya had begun to believe in quiet mornings, the smell of coffee, the slow hum of cadet drills in the distance, the kind of silence that didn't carry ghosts. But peace, she was learning, had fine print. It wasn't granted. It was loaned, and it demanded interest in unexpected ways. It began with a phone call at 3:17 a.m. The sound cut through her sleep, sharp, mechanical, too clean to ignore. She sat up, instinct before reason, reaching for the pistol she no longer needed beside the bed. Old habits didn't die. They lingered coiled. "Reeves," she answered, voice graveled. There was no introduction on the other end, just a breath, then a voice she hadn't heard in months. "It's me," Harrington said. Her pulse slowed, but not by much. "Sir, I'm not calling in any official capacity." "Then why are you calling at 3 in the morning?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't want you to hear this from someone else." Something in his tone, that careful restraint she'd come to recognize from the field, tightened the air around her. "What happened?" "Recon unit went down. Northern sector, phantom site coordinates." Her chest went still. "How many?" "3 missing, 1 confirmed." "And you think—" "I don't think," he cut in. "I know the camp's active again. Someone rebuilt it." Silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Finally she said, "Why tell me this?" "Because you deserve to know." "That's not an answer." He sighed, the sound heavy with something she couldn't name. "Because they're sending a team, and I wanted you to stay out of it." Her eyes drifted to the rifle case leaning in the corner, unopened for weeks. "And if I do?" "Maya," his voice softened. "You've done your part, let someone else take this one." She didn't reply. The line went quiet, just the faint buzz of distance between them. When he finally spoke again, it was a whisper, not a command, but something closer to a plea. "You can't save everyone. You never could." Then the line went dead. By dawn she was already driving. The sky burned orange in the rearview mirror, the sun rising over miles of highway. Her duffel bag sat in the passenger seat, light, efficient, just like always. The Barrett case lay in the trunk. She told herself she wasn't going. Then she'd started the car anyway. Old soldiers didn't need reasons. They needed closure. She reached Fort Carson by evening. The base looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she'd grown beyond it. Harrington was there, waiting near the hangar, his face set in that expression that always said, "I knew you'd come. I just hoped you wouldn't." "You don't take orders well," he said as she stepped out. "Never claimed to." He nodded toward the tarmac. "You realize this isn't your mission anymore." She looked past him, where a Black Hawk sat idling, blades cutting the air. "I'm not here for the mission." "Then why are you here?" She met his eyes. "Because they rebuilt it, and you know I can't live with that." He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You always were predictable." "Predictable saves lives." "And costs them too." Neither spoke for a while. The sound of the helicopter filled the space between them. Finally he said quietly, "If you're going as an observer, not a trigger." She didn't argue. Sometimes you agreed to the rules just to get inside the door. The flight into the mountains felt like a ghost replay, the same terrain, the same ridgelines, even the same cold that seeped into her gloves. But the faces were different this time, younger, sharper, still carrying belief instead of scars. The team's lead, Lieutenant Perez, introduced herself mid-flight. "Ma'am, we've read your file. It's an honor." Maya nodded. "Files don't bleed, Lieutenant. People do. Keep your team close." Perez smiled awkwardly, unsure if it was advice or warning. Harrington sat across from Maya, silent through most of the flight. When he finally spoke, His voice was low enough that the others couldn't hear. "I told them you were here as a consultant. I didn't tell them what you were really looking for." "And what's that, sir?" He looked out the window at the mountains below. "Peace, the kind that doesn't ask for proof." They set down at dusk, the sky bruised with violet and ash. The mountains rose like old gods around them. The coordinates led to what had once been a ruin, the compound Maya had leveled half a year ago. Now, tents dotted the valley again, smaller, scattered, like someone rebuilding from memory. The team moved quiet, setting perimeter positions. Maya followed Harrington up the ridge to a vantage point. From there, the valley unfolded below them, the fires glowing like embers against the dark. "It's different," she said quietly. "It always is," he replied. "They never rebuild the same way twice. That's how they survive." She watched through binoculars, scanning movement. "They're not soldiers," she said finally, "too uncoordinated." "Locals?" "Maybe, maybe not." Then, as she focused on the center tent, she froze. A shadow moved inside, tall, deliberate, the gait eerily familiar. Her voice caught in her throat. "That can't be." "What?" Harrington asked. She handed him the binoculars. "Look." He did, and then, for the first time since she'd known him, she saw his composure falter. "Impossible," he muttered. But it was. The man moving through the tent was Azam Tarek. "He's dead," she said, almost to herself. "Was," Harrington replied, "or someone wants us to believe otherwise." She stared at the fire-lit figure. Why fake his death? Same reason men like him always do, to build in the dark. Her hands clenched at her sides. "We can take him now. One shot, end this." Harrington's tone hardened. "That's not why you're here." "Then why bring me at all?" "To see, not to act. To understand what unfinished looks like, so maybe you can finally stop carrying it." She looked at him, disbelief and something sharper behind her eye. "You think this is therapy?" "I think it's choice." She turned back to the valley, the rifle's ghost weight pulling at her memory. Through the binoculars, she watched Tarek speak to his men, his gestures calm, certain. Her trigger finger twitched, phantom pain, muscle memory. The line between duty and closure blurred. "Permission to engage," she whispered. "No," Harrington said. "Sir." "I said no." His voice wasn't anger, it was finality. She lowered the binoculars slowly. "He'll kill again. Maybe, or maybe someone else will stop him, but it doesn't have to be you." She stared at him, breathing hard. "You brought me here just to walk away." "I brought you here to see that you can." They stayed until dawn. The fires in the valley died one by one. The camp dissolved into shadows. When the helicopter came to extract them, Maya didn't look back. As they lifted off, the mountain wind howled through the cabin, cold and relentless. Harrington watched her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she said quietly, "You knew he was alive." "I suspected." "And you didn't tell me, because you thought I'd do something stupid." "I didn't tell you," he said, "because I wanted to see if you'd choose differently." She leaned back, the fatigue heavy now. "And did I?" He smiled faintly. "You're still alive, that's different enough." Back at the base, she unpacked the Barrett and cleaned it in silence. Not because it was dirty, but because rituals are how soldiers talk to ghosts. When she finished, she slid the bolt forward, locked it safe, and placed a note inside the case before closing it. The note read, "The war's still out there, but it's not mine anymore." She left the case in Harrington's office. No signature, no goodbye. That evening, Maya stood on the runway watching the horizon bleed into gold. The helicopters came and went. Pilots saluted. Engines roared. Life went on. She lifted her hand in a small wave as one of them passed, a gesture of farewell not to anyone in particular, but to everything she had been. For the first time, she didn't feel hollow. She felt light. Maybe peace wasn't something you found in silence or ceremony. Maybe it was in the decision not to pull the trigger when you could. When she drove away from the base that night, the mountains faded in her rearview mirror, not like ghosts chasing her, but like old teachers finally letting her go. Some wars, she realized, don't end when the shooting stops. They end when you stop needing the fight to define you. She smiled softly, the road stretching ahead like promise. And somewhere behind her, under the same sky, Captain Harrington stood at the range, holding the note she'd left behind. He read it twice, then looked up at the stars and whispered, "You finally saw it, didn't you?" Because sometimes, seeing clearly has nothing to do with perfect vision. Why do we spend a lifetime learning to let go? For Maya Reeves, it wasn't the battles, the medals, or the ghosts that defined her. It was the letting go. It happened quietly, as most endings do. No gunfire, no orders, no noise. Just a morning that began like any other until she realized she no longer woke up searching for something she'd lost. Months had passed since she'd walked away from the mountain. She lived now in a small house overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, far from bases and briefing tents. The walls were bare except for a framed photograph, 3 soldiers standing side by side in the Afghan sun. 2 of them were gone. The third, wearing an eye patch and a tired smile, was still learning how to be home. She rose early each morning before the water stilled, before the world remembered its noise. Coffee, stretch, then the long walk down to the pier. Her prosthetic eye patch had been replaced by a simpler one, plain black canvas, nothing tactical about it. She didn't need camouflage anymore. Seagulls traced lazy arcs across the horizon. The bay shimmered, restless but calm. She found comfort in that contradiction. The sea never truly stopped moving, but it always returned to itself. Maybe she could, too. She still taught occasionally, guest lectures for cadets who wanted to understand what restraint meant from someone who'd learned it the hard way. The young faces always asked the same questions. Was it worth it? Do you regret it? Did it change you? Her answers changed depending on the day. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes no, but most often, "It made me see." They never understood what she meant, not yet, but she saw the flicker of curiosity in their eyes, the same spark she once had before she learned how fragile conviction could be. One afternoon, after a seminar, a cadet lingered as the others filed out. He was quiet, serious, maybe 20, his uniform still too stiff, his salute too precise. "Ma'am," he said, voice hesitant, "I read your after-action reports, Operation Phantom Sight." She smiled slightly. "They let you read that?" He flushed. A redacted version, ma'am, but the details," he hesitated, then added softly, "you stayed behind. You covered their retreat." She nodded, the memory returning like an old song. Someone had to. The cadet shifted, uneasy. "Do you ever wish you had?" Maya met his gaze, her single eye steady. "Every day," she said, "and not once." He frowned, trying to understand the contradiction. She continued, "You'll learn someday that duty and peace don't live in the same room. You do what you must, and then you learn to forgive yourself for it." The cadet nodded slowly, as if memorizing not the words but the tone. "Thank you, ma'am." When he left, she sat alone for a while, staring at the empty chairs. Teaching had become her new battlefield, a quieter one but no less demanding. That night she found an envelope slipped under her door. No name, no return address, just one word written across the front in rough, familiar handwriting. "Harrington." She tore it open carefully. Inside was a short letter. "Maya. Retiring next month. They offered me a desk. I declined. Thought you'd want to know. Tarek's confirmed. Gone for good this time. No rebuild, no ghosts. I suppose that means we can finally stop watching the horizon. If you're ever near DC, there's a chair on my porch with your name on it. No mission talk, no medals, just quiet. You earned that, James. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside the photograph on her shelf. The sun was setting outside, the sky painted in the same colors she remembered from her deployment, the reds and golds of endings and beginnings. For the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not the sharp, contained tears of soldiers, but the kind that arrive without permission, the kind that wash away more than grief. A week later, she drove south. The road curved along the bay, the trees giving way to open fields. She played no music. The sound of the wind through the car window was enough. When she reached the small farmhouse outside D.C., Harrington was sitting exactly where he said he'd be, on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the light fade over the horizon. He looked older now, not weaker, just settled, like a blade dulled not by neglect, but by peace. He smiled as she stepped out of the car. Took you long enough. She smiled back. Traffic. They didn't hug. Soldiers rarely did. They simply sat side by side watching the world turn gold. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't the kind that demanded words. It was the kind that said, "We made it." Finally, Harrington said, "You ever think about going back?" "Every day," she said, "and every day I choose not to." He nodded. "That's progress." They watched the sun sink lower, the last light glinting off the bay in the distance. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first saw you on that range, I didn't think you'd make it through training." "I know," she said, "you weren't subtle." He laughed, a real one this time. "Guess I was, but I was wrong." Maya looked out toward the fading light. We both were. As darkness fell, Harrington went inside to make more coffee. Maya stayed on the porch, breathing in the night air. Crickets hummed. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled, soft and distant. She looked up at the stars and thought about the men and women she'd served with, the ones still out there, the ones who never came back, and the ones who never stopped fighting their wars long after they left the battlefield. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a spent shell casing, polished smooth from years of turning it over in her fingers. She'd kept it since that day in the mountains, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. She placed it on the porch railing and whispered, "You can rest now." It wasn't a prayer, it was a release. The next morning, Harrington found her already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. The dawn light touched her face, soft and quiet. "You sleep?" he asked. "For once." He smiled. "Plans?" She looked out the window toward the rising sun. "Maybe I'll stay, teach part-time, write, watch the tide." He nodded. "Sounds like a mission." She smirked. "Yeah, one I might actually finish." Later that day, she walked down to the pier behind the farmhouse. The river flowed slow and silver beneath her boots. She stood there for a long while, the wind brushing against her, the sky wide and endless. She reached up, unfastened her eye patch, and let the sunlight touch the scar. For once, she didn't feel the weight of what she'd lost. She felt only what remained. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's done." And it was. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, maybe quiet, maybe noise, maybe both. But she knew this. She'd stopped living for the shot that defined her and started living for the breaths that followed. She turned away from the water, walking back toward the farmhouse, the sound of her boots soft against the wood. Behind her, the wind lifted the old shell casing from the porch and sent it tumbling into the grass below, disappearing into the earth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is come home.